There is something you have been doing for so long that you no longer even notice it. It has become as automatic as breathing, as invisible as the air you take in each morning before you even open your eyes. You do it at the dinner table when someone says something you disagree with and you choose silence. You do it at work when your idea is better, but you let someone else speak first. You do it in your relationships when you feel something deeply, but swallow it whole because you're afraid of how the other person will react. You do it when you make yourself smaller, quieter, less, so that the people around you can feel bigger, more comfortable, more at ease. And the most devastating part of all of this is that you were never taught this was harmful. You were taught this was kindness. You were taught this was love. You were taught that being easy to be around was the same as being good. But Carl Jung would tell you something entirely different. He would tell you that every time you
shrink yourself to fit into someone else's comfort, you are not loving them. You are abandoning yourself. And there is a price for that kind of abandonment. And it is far greater than you have been told. If you have ever felt a strange, exhausting tension in your chest after a conversation where you said everything was fine when it wasn't, this video is for you. If you have ever left a room feeling like you left a piece of yourself on the floor, this is for you. If you have spent years wondering why you feel invisible even when you are surrounded by people, this is for you. The fact that you are here watching this right now is not an accident. At Carl Jung Philosophy, we believe that the content you are drawn to at the exact moment you need it is your unconscious sending you a signal. And today, that signal is this: it is time to stop making yourself small. Jung spent his entire life studying the architecture of the human psyche. He believed that each of us carries within us a vast inner world, a universe of unconscious patterns, archetypes, fears, and unmet potentials, all waiting to be seen. And one of the most destructive patterns he observed, one he documented across patients, across cultures, across centuries of human behavior, was the pattern of the collapsed self. The self that has been compressed, folded, and tucked away to make room for everyone else. He called this process the subordination of the self to the persona, and he warned with clarity and urgency that no genuine life could be lived from that place. Before we go any deeper, I want to ask you to do something. If any of what I am saying resonates with you right now, if something inside you is recognizing itself in these words, go to the comments and type the number 44. Not because it is a rule, not because someone told you to, but because 44 in the energetic field represents foundation and inner structure. The very thing that begins to crack when we spend too long building our lives around other people's comfort instead of our own truth. Let that number be your first act of reclaiming your space today. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Why do we shrink in the first place? Jung was very precise about this. He said that the process begins in childhood. From the very first years of your life, you were learning one fundamental question, and that question was not, "Who am I?" That question was, "What do I need to be in order to be loved?" Think about that for a moment. From an age when you were too young to protect yourself, too young to survive alone, too young to understand the complexity of adult psychology, you were performing a constant and sophisticated calculation. You were reading the emotional temperature of the room. You were noticing what made the people around you smile, what made them tense, what made them pull away, and what made them come closer. And with the brilliant survival intelligence of a developing mind, you adapted. You became what was needed. You became quieter if quiet was rewarded. You became funnier if laughter eased the tension. You became helpful, agreeable, easy, small. And it worked. It kept you safe. It kept you loved. Or at least, it gave you the closest approximation of love that was available to you at the time. Jung called this formation the persona, the mask we construct to navigate the social world. And he was careful to say that the persona is not inherently evil. We all need social masks. We all need to know how to move through different contexts and relationships with a degree of adaptability. But there is a line, and that line is crossed the moment the persona is no longer something you wear, but something you become. The moment the mask fuses with the face. The moment you can no longer remember what you actually think, feel, want, or need, because you have spent so many years shaping yourself around the preferences of others that your own interior has gone silent. And here is what most people never understand about that silence. It is not peace. It is not contentment. It is not the quiet of someone who has found inner harmony. It is the silence of suppression. It is what happens when a part of you, the truest, most vital, most authentic part of you, has been told again and again in 1,000 subtle ways that it is too much, too intense, too inconvenient, or simply not welcome. Jung called this suppressed material the shadow. Not the shadow of something dark and monstrous, as popular culture sometimes suggests, but the shadow of everything human and real that you were not allowed to be. Your anger that was never permitted. Your ambition that was made to feel like arrogance. Your sadness that was told to be gratitude. Your boundaries that were called selfishness. Your desires that were dismissed as childish. All of it, every piece of yourself you ever put away to make someone else more comfortable, lives in the shadow. And it does not disappear there. It waits. Right now, pause for a second. If you are the kind of person who has spent years saying sorry for things that were not your fault, type 111 in the comments, because 111 is a frequency of new beginnings, and that is precisely what becomes available to you the moment you stop apologizing for existing as your full self. And we want to see how many of you in the Carl Jung philosophy community are ready for that new beginning right now. Jung observed something that was both simple and revolutionary. He said that what you do not make conscious will be directed at you as fate.
Read that again. What you do not make conscious will be directed at you as fate. When you do not bring the shadow into awareness, when you continue to compress, suppress, and deny the authentic dimensions of your inner life, those compressed energies do not evaporate. They find expression in the external world. They show up in the patterns of your relationships. They appear in the chronic dissatisfaction that follows you from one life stage to the next. They manifest in the physical body as tension, fatigue, and illness. They surface in the inexplicable grief you feel on ordinary afternoons when nothing is technically wrong, and yet everything feels profoundly off. This is not fate in the mystical sense of the word. This is psychology operating at its most fundamental level. You cannot indefinitely fold yourself around the edges of other people's comfort without the authentic self pushing back. It always pushes back. The only question is whether that push comes as conscious awakening or as unconscious crisis. Let me be specific about what shrinking yourself actually looks like, because it wears many faces, and some of them are dressed to look like virtue. It looks like always being the one who adapts in a disagreement. It looks like laughing at a joke that made you feel small because you did not want to seem sensitive. It looks like saying yes to plans you did not want to attend because canceling felt selfish. It looks like editing your enthusiasm before speaking because you have been told before that you are too much. It looks like watching someone get credit for your idea without speaking up. It looks like staying in a relationship, a friendship, a job, a family dynamic that quietly communicates that your authentic presence is unwelcome. And perhaps most insidiously, it looks like the interior habit of constant self-monitoring, the ongoing low-frequency background noise of asking yourself before you speak, before you act, before you even feel something, is this okay? Will this upset them? Will they still like me if I say this? Am I being too much? That self-monitoring is not humility. It is not emotional intelligence. It is the hypervigilance of someone who learned early that their authentic self was a problem to be managed. And the energetic cost of that monitoring is enormous. Quantum physics tells us that observation itself changes the nature of what is observed. And the same is true in the psychological field. When you are perpetually observing yourself through the imagined lens of other people's judgment, you are collapsing your own wave function before it has the chance to fully express. You are not living. You are perpetually rehearsing a version of yourself that is safe enough for public consumption. And the full frequency of who you actually are never gets to vibrate at its natural amplitude. Here at Carl Jung Philosophy, we talk often about the concept of individuation, Jung's term for the lifelong process of becoming fully and authentically oneself. And individuation is not a destination you arrive at cleanly. It is a direction you choose, again and again, in the small and large moments of your daily life. Every time you speak your truth when silence would have been easier, you are individuating. Every time you hold a boundary when dissolving it would have been more convenient. You are individuating. Every time you choose to feel what you actually feel, rather than what you think you should feel, you are individuating. And every single one of those moments is an act of profound courage, because they require you to risk the disapproval of others in order to remain in relationship with yourself. Now, I want to take a moment and ask you something directly. When is the last time you were in a room, in a conversation, in a relationship, and you allowed yourself to be completely, uncomplicatedly yourself? No editing, no monitoring, no pre-calculation of how the other person might receive you. When is the last time you spoke a full thought from beginning to end without softening the edges? If you are struggling to remember, if the question itself brings up something that feels like grief, then the pattern we are describing today is not a minor inconvenience in your life. It is a central, organizing fact of your experience. And it deserves your attention, not tomorrow, not when things are calmer, not when you have more courage, but now. If you are watching this and you feel something stirring, something ancient and persistent saying, yes, this is it. This is what I have been living. Drop the number 520 in the comments. In the field of energetic resonance, 520 represents the heart opening, the moment the inner world begins to align with what the soul has always known. And we want to witness every single person in this community who is feeling that alignment right now. Jung wrote extensively about what he called the inferior function, the psychological capacity that we most consistently repress and deny. And he made a fascinating observation. He said that a person's greatest strength and a person's most suppressed quality are almost always the same thing. The woman who was told her sensitivity was weakness is, at her core, profoundly gifted in emotional intelligence and empathic attunement. The man who was taught that his creativity was impractical is, at his core, a visionary who perceives possibilities that others cannot see. The child who was told they were too intense is, in their full expression, someone with a rare capacity for depth, for meaning, for connection that most people spend their entire lives searching for. What was condemned in you was not a defect. It was a threat to the people who had already made peace with their own smallness. And so they named it a problem, and you believed them. That is the moment the shrinking begins. That is the moment you start to build the life that is acceptable, rather than the life that is authentic. That is the moment you choose the version of yourself that keeps the peace, rather than the version of yourself that makes your soul feel fully inhabited. And there is a kind of mourning that is necessary here. A grief for the years spent in that self-imposed compression. Jung was very clear that psychological wholeness cannot be achieved by skipping the grief. You have to mourn the self you were never allowed to be before you can fully step into that self you are becoming. So if right now, reading these words, you feel something rising in you that resembles sadness, let it come. It is not weakness. It is recognition.
It is the interior self saying, finally, finally someone is speaking about this. Here is what nobody told you about the people you have been shrinking for. When you make yourself smaller to accommodate someone's comfort, you are not actually helping them. You are enabling them. You are confirming for them that the world operates the way they need it to, that they can remain unchanged, that their comfort is more important than your truth, that your authentic self is something that needs to be managed and contained. You are, in the deepest sense, participating in the construction of a dynamic that serves neither of you. Because a relationship that requires your silence to survive is not a relationship. It is a performance. And a community that requires your compliance to accept you is not a community. It is a cage that has learned to call itself belonging. Jung believed that genuine love, genuine friendship, genuine community could only occur between two people who were both willing to bring their full selves to the encounter. Not perfect selves, not always comfortable selves, but real ones. He called this the encounter of two worlds, and he said that it was one of the rarest and most transformative things that could happen between human beings. And it can only happen when both people are willing to be seen. Not the curated version, not the managed version, the actual version. With all its complexity, its contradictions, its beauty, and its shadow. Now let us talk about the practical reality of what it means to stop shrinking, because this is where many people get lost. They understand the concept. They feel the resonance. They know on some level that they have been making themselves small. But when it comes to actually changing the pattern, the fear becomes overwhelming. Because here is the truth about what happens when you begin to take up more space. Some people will not like it. Some people, specifically the people whose comfort has depended on your compression, will push back. They will call it selfish. They will call it difficult. They will say you have changed, and they will not say it as a compliment. And this is the moment that separates the people who truly commit to their own becoming from the people who understand the concept and then retreat back into the familiar smallness. Jung was not naive about this. He knew that the path of individuation was not universally celebrated by the people in your immediate circle. In fact, he often observed that the more authentically a person began to live, the more certain kinds of relationships naturally fell away, and the more certain other kinds of relationships naturally appeared. This is not metaphysical speculation. This is the logical consequence of vibrating at a different frequency. When you change your fundamental energetic signature, when you stop broadcasting the signal of someone who can be diminished, you will find that the people who are drawn to your smallness have less reason to stay, and the people who are capable of meeting your fullness begin to arrive. At this point in the video, I want you to do something that might feel slightly uncomfortable. I want you to think of one relationship in your life, just one, where you consistently make yourself smaller, where you edit, filter, and compress your authentic experience in order to maintain the peace or preserve the other person's comfort. Not to blame, not to judge, just to see it clearly, to name it, because you cannot change a pattern that you refuse to fully look at. And when you have identified that relationship, I want you to ask yourself one question. What would you say, do, or feel differently if you trusted, truly trusted, that your authentic self was not a problem to be managed, but a gift to be offered? If that question makes your heart beat a little faster, if something in you is both terrified and relieved by it simultaneously, type 777 in the comments. Because 777 is the number of inner wisdom activating, of the unconscious becoming conscious, of the self beginning the process of remembering its own wholeness. And what you are experiencing right now, in this moment, is exactly that activation. Jung described the self, capital S, as the organizing archetype of the entire psyche. Not the ego, which is only the small, conscious surface of who you are, but the deeper self, the wholeness that encompasses both your conscious and unconscious dimensions. And he said that the journey of a human life, when it is truly lived, is a movement toward that wholeness. Not perfection, not the elimination of difficulty or shadow or complexity, but wholeness, the integration of all that you are, including the parts you were told were too much, the parts you put away to make others comfortable, the parts that have been living in the dark, patiently waiting for you to remember them. That waiting has a cost. When parts of the psyche are denied integration, they do not simply disappear into the unconscious and stay still. They accumulate energy. They build pressure. And eventually, that pressure expresses itself, either constructively through a conscious awakening where you feel pulled back to your own truth, or destructively through depression, anxiety, burnout, chronic dissatisfaction, or the sudden and terrifying feeling that the life you are living is not, in some fundamental way, yours. If you have ever had that feeling, if you have ever looked around at the life you have carefully constructed and felt a strange and inexplicable alienation from it, Jung would say that is the self trying to reach the ego. That is your wholeness knocking on the door of your awareness. That is not a crisis to be medicated or distracted away. That is an invitation. The doorway to answering that invitation is always the same. It begins with honesty. Not the honesty you perform for others, but the honesty you offer yourself in the quiet moments before sleep, in the spaces between tasks, in the unguarded seconds before the persona snaps back into place. What do I actually want? What am I actually feeling? What do I actually believe? What would I actually say if I were not afraid? These questions are the beginning of everything. They are the first step of individuation. They are the moment the self stops being an abstract concept and starts being a lived reality. And I want to be clear about something. This is not a call to recklessness. This is not permission to wound people with honesty or to dismantle your responsibilities in the name of authenticity. Jung was a sophisticated thinker, and he understood that psychological wholeness required both authenticity and wisdom, both full self-expression and conscious awareness of impact.
What he was calling for was not the abandonment of care for others. It was the refusal to make that care conditional on the abandonment of yourself. You can be fully present for the people you love and be fully present for yourself at the same time. These two things are not opposites. In fact, the greatest gift you can give to anyone who loves you is the full, unedited, authentic presence of who you actually are. Because when you give them the managed, compressed version, you are not giving them you. You are giving them a performance. And no one can truly love a performance, no matter how polished it becomes. If you are still here, if you have traveled this far into this conversation, and something inside you feels both undone and strangely liberated at the same time, I want you to know something. This channel, Carl Jung Philosophy, exists because we believe that the most radical act available to a human being is the act of becoming fully themselves. Not the self that was shaped by fear, by the need for approval, by the early and urgent necessity of fitting in, but the self that existed before all of that, the one who knew exactly what it wanted, who felt deeply and without apology, who had instincts and desires and visions that were entirely its own. That self has not gone anywhere. It has been waiting. And the fact that you are here in this conversation, feeling what you are feeling right now, is proof that it is still trying to reach you. Before we close today, I want to give you something practical to carry out of this space. Jung often spoke of the importance of what he called active imagination, the deliberate practice of entering into conversation with the interior dimensions of the psyche. And one of the simplest versions of this practice is this. Take a piece of paper or open a blank document and write at the top the words, "What have I been afraid to say?" And then write. Do not edit, do not monitor, do not ask whether it is appropriate or reasonable or kind. Just write whatever comes for as long as it comes. Let it be messy. Let it be angry or grieving or confused or hopeful or some impossible combination of all of those things at once. Because what comes out of that practice is not just writing. It is the first sound of a self that has been waiting in silence for a long, long time. This is individuation. This is what Jung was pointing toward, not a dramatic transformation that happens in a single moment of revelation, but the slow, steady, daily practice of choosing yourself, not instead of others, but alongside others, with the same generosity and compassion and full presence that you have always offered everyone else. Beginning today. If this conversation reached something real in you, if you feel like this was not just a video, but something closer to a reckoning, leave the number 11 in the comments. Because 11 is the number of awakening, of the boundary between what was and what is becoming, of the precise moment the self begins to remember its own name. And when you leave that number, you are not just engaging with an algorithm. You are making a declaration to your own unconscious. You are saying, I see what has been happening. I understand the cost. And I am ready to stop shrinking. There is something else that happens when you consistently make yourself small that almost no one talks about. And Jung identified it with extraordinary precision.
He called it the loss of Eros, the vital, animating principle of relatedness and life force that moves through a human being when they are genuinely alive to themselves. Eros is not simply romantic love, though it includes that. Eros is the quality of aliveness that you feel when you are fully engaged, when you are moved by something, when you care deeply and without reservation, when you create something from your authentic interior rather than from obligation or performance. And when you spend years compressing yourself around the edges of other people's comfort, Eros begins to diminish. Not dramatically, not in a single moment you can point to. Gradually, quietly, you stop being excited about things that once lit you up. Not because the things changed, but because the self that was capable of that excitement has been so thoroughly trained to stand down that it no longer responds with full energy. This is what many people describe as a kind of internal grayness. Not depression exactly, not crisis exactly, but a muted quality to experience, a sense that the colors of life have somehow been turned down without your consent. That is Eros in retreat. That is the psyche signaling that it has been underlived for too long. Jung believed that the restoration of Eros required one thing above all others: the willingness to risk disapproval in service of authenticity. Because Eros moves where truth moves. It follows genuine expression. It flows in the direction of the real. And every time you speak the truth about what you actually feel, every time you act from your authentic desire rather than from the anxious calculation of what others expect, you are inviting Eros back into your field. You are saying to your own life force, it is safe to come forward now. I am not going to fold you away this time. And slowly, with patience and repetition, the color comes back. The excitement returns. The sense of being genuinely present in your own life, rather than watching it from behind a wall of self-management, begins to restore itself. This is not magic. It is not mysticism. It is the basic, documented psychology of what happens to a human being who stops betraying themselves and starts, with courage and consistency, choosing their own wholeness. And it takes time. Jung was deeply skeptical of quick transformations and sudden conversions. He trusted the long, slow, demanding work of genuine change. The change that happens not because of one conversation or one revelation, but because of the 1,000 small daily decisions to remain loyal to your own interior truth. To notice when you are about to shrink and choose differently. Not perfectly, not without fear, but differently. The people who have done this work, who have walked the difficult and profoundly rewarding path of individuation, describe a quality of life that is qualitatively different from the managed, compressed existence that preceded it. Not easier necessarily, often in fact more complex, more demanding, more exposed. Because when you stop hiding behind smallness, you are visible in a way you were never visible before. And visibility is vulnerable. But what they also describe is an aliveness, a sense of genuine presence in their own experience, a quality of contact with other people that was simply not available
when they were spending all of their energy performing a version of themselves designed to be acceptable. They describe knowing who they are in a way that is not dependent on external confirmation. They describe the strange and steady peace of a person who has stopped running from themselves. That is what is available to you, not as a distant ideal, not as a destination that requires years of therapy or spiritual practice before you can even begin to approach it. But right now, in this moment, in the simple and radical act of deciding that the self you have been compressing, the self you have been making small, the self you have been offering to others in edited, approved, acceptable portions, deserves to be fully expressed, deserves to be heard, deserves to take up its actual space in the world. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And he was right. It is terrifying because it means releasing the armor of smallness that has kept you safe for so long. It means trusting that who you fully are is not only acceptable, but necessary, not just for yourself, but for the world. Because the world does not need more managed, compressed, acceptable versions of human beings. It has more than enough of those. What it needs, what it has always needed, are people who are willing to fully inhabit themselves. People who take up their actual space. People who speak with their actual voice. People who feel with their actual hearts. People who refuse, finally and completely, to make themselves smaller so that others can avoid the discomfort of encountering something real. You are one of those people. That is why you are here. That is why this found you. And now the only question that remains is what you are going to do with what you have recognized. Stop shrinking. The world has been waiting for all of you. And so, quietly and faithfully, has the deepest part of yourself. You always have. The question was never whether you were enough. The question was whether you were willing to finally stop pretending that you were not. Today, with every word of this conversation, we are saying yes to that willingness. And that yes is the most important thing you have said in a very long time. Welcome back to yourself.